Managing psychosocial hazards and work-related stress is at the foundation of an effective approach to psychological health and safety. We'll talk with an attorney and author who is also one of the top voices in the country on dignity and respect in the global workplace on this episode of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. From Flourish DX, this is the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. Safety at work is more than freedom from physical injury. To be safe, you have to feel safe. Join us each week as we discuss psychologically healthy and safe work in the USA. Welcome to this week's Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. I'm your host, Dr. I. David Daniels, and I want to thank you for tuning in. Each week, we seek to increase awareness of the importance of psychological health and safety by learning from the lived experiences, research, and expertise of our guests, and advocating strategies to reduce harm and minimize vulnerability to psychosocial hazards in the American workplace. For those of us, including me, of course, who've been following this podcast from the start, one of my critiques of the state of psychosocial safety and health in the United States is our lack of a regulation or adopted standards regulating psychosocial hazards and how we should address them. However, much of what we know in this country is a product of research that's been done on bullying in the workplace, which we recognize as the psychosocial hazard with the most depth and the most, again, recognition by most people. A few years ago, I was invited by our episode 4 guest, Dr. Gary Namian, founder of the Workplace Bullying Institute, to an event that assembled some of the top experts in the United States and a couple from around the world on the subject of workplace bullying prevention. One of the invitees is actually the guest for this session. And it's really neat to be able to reconnect. She recently authored an exciting new book, Managing Psychosocial Hazards and Work-Related Stress in Today's Work Environment, International Insights for the U.S. Organization. It's something that I think we really need here in the U.S. is some information about what's going on around the world to help inform what should be going on here in the U.S., at least someday we're hoping. So my guest, and I'm honored to have her, is Ellen Cobb to this episode. And Ellen, I'm going to welcome you like I do most of my guests, or actually all of my guests to the podcast, with this question. Who is Ellen?
Well, hi, David. I'm happy to be here. And I listened to your podcast, so I'm ready for this question. I think it's an awesome intro question. So I've thought about it a little bit because it's one of these big questions in a way. But professionally, I'm going to offer this in the order that I find its importance matters to me. I'm an author. I've written 3 books, one on bullying around the world, laws and developments, one on sexual harassment, developments and laws around the world, and then the 3rd book you just mentioned about managing psychosocial hazards. I'm also a subject matter expert for a global training company. And I've just recently become a subject matter expert for a U.S. company that does training. And my focus is on sexual harassment and harassment for truckers. And they want to develop more interesting training than is offered by states where it's required. And I applaud that. And I'm an attorney. I throw that in last. It's something, but it's not my identity. Okay, so that's me professionally. And personally, I live right outside of Boston. And I have a couple of daughters who are grown up. And I now have a 7-month-old granddaughter who I help take care of. And I like to go to the beach and read.
Hey, yeah, well, that's interesting. I actually lived in Worcester for about a year. The winters were too much for me, I have to be honest. So
I think if you don't grow up in New England, it's just too much, and it's still hard enough.
Yeah, it's really difficult. Yeah, I was born and raised in Seattle, and we didn't have that much snow there, and I live in Atlanta, and we have virtually no snow here. So, and this was a stop kind of in between for I was working up in the area. But yeah, the 18 inches of snow on the ground, it was a little bit much for me. So
It's brutal. It's
absolutely.
brutal.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. So it's so interesting how, how we come to this conversation, the intersection of our, again, both of our work around workplace bullying and the intersection. I didn't really recognize or understand that bullying was a psychosocial hazard when we first met. I knew about bullying, having been a target myself. And actually, something I learned through that whole process was not only was I target, there were occasions in my career where I was the bully as well. And
Interesting.
and that I fully recognize that by now knowing that when you're in an environment, you kind of, most mammals, we imitate behavior of other people. And if you don't get training, you do imitation. So you imitate what you think is right. But that's probably a conversation for another day. So when you hear the phrase or the term psychosocial or psychological health and safety, I should say, what does that engender for you? What do you think of when you hear psychological health and safety? What does that mean to you?
Well, I think what it means to me is going to be coming from my book, because as you already pointed out, this country is kind of definitely lagging behind. But I learned that in other countries, psychological health and safety has to do with treating the whole worker, really, making their psychological health and safety on an equal playing field with physical health and safety. And that kind of comes through a lot of laws and codes of practice and guidelines where the employer's responsible for somebody's psychological health and safety, just like their physical health and safety. So that's I'm not sure what it means to me as much as what I've learned it means in other places that have addressed it. And it also means addressing psychological health and safety, as a lot of places are referring to it as the fourth arm of occupational health and safety. And so it's just a part of workplace health and safety. I know there's the term psychological safety that's a little bit different, feeling safe at work, but I think that plays into it also. It does.
Yeah, I agree. I think that is a little bit of a challenge for people to get what psychological health and safety is, because they basically use those terms interchangeably, and they're related, but they are different.
Right.
Dr. Edmondson's work around having an environment where people feel, good to bring their whole self and not worry about, how they're going to be, how people react to them, how they be treated, that type of thing. That's very important. But the challenge is, I believe, in my experience, I've only worked here in the US, but my experience is that you'll never get or maintain psychological safety if you don't focus on psychological health and safety. You've got to do both of them. Otherwise, neither of them really works if you don't do both. Yeah.
Exactly. If you don't feel right, if you're not providing an environment, I guess it's called the workplace environment,
Yes.
Whether it's psychosocial environment or it's just an environment where people do feel safe.
Right.
To it all goes back to stress, I guess.
Yes.
Work-related stress,
Yes.
whether that's from not feeling safe at work in any kind of way.
Right. So what leads an attorney in the US to start studying psychosocial hazards? Because again, my research on this topic has been focused from an occupational safety and health perspective. So, and frankly, I have to be honest. So there are many in the occupational health and safety community that are just coming around, and some don't agree at all. Some don't believe this is not a safety thing. It's something else. It's something HR people ought to do. Call the attorneys, call those other people. And so how did you get into this? What motivated you to do the research to eventually end up with a book?
Well, I'll tell you, a lot of people have a life and career plan laid out, and I apparently don't. But for years, starting in law school, I worked at the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination. And it really, that was the place. I worked there in law school. I worked there on and off for years as a neutral. So, what I did there, that's the state civil rights agency, and people bring employment discrimination cases. So I became very familiar with employment discrimination and harassment. And kind of out of the blue, I picked up a job, an editing job as the editor at an international environmental and occupational health and safety consulting company right across Boston Common. I was kind of 2 part-time jobs. And so that morphed into my being part of the staff and working on updates to occupational health and safety laws in other countries. So I'm reading through these laws and I see discrimination, and then I see workplace bullying. And I'm like, what is this? I've never heard of it. And I'm reading about it and I'm realizing it's like discrimination without this protected class. So it really clicked for me and I became really fascinated. And then I just decided to put together a book about the laws and developments, because just like in law school, not that much interested me, but this field, treating people fairly at work really did. And same with workplace, same with occupational health and safety. I might not really care that much about like machine guarding and emissions, but I certainly cared about this. So that led me to realize that bullying, and I always say this, bullying's a big thing, but it's part of a bigger thing. And that bigger thing is psychosocial hazards. And again, other countries were addressing this and sometimes putting bullying in, the laws that said psychosocial hazards have to be managed by the employer. And then that includes bullying, that includes, excessive workload. So that's my weird path to get there. Not really planned out.
Well, I have to admit it's a bit of a unique way to get there, but it makes sense when you talk about it.
Yeah.
So you said that a bit of a rabbit trail, if you allow me. You said that the part about taking discrimination claims and trying to help people who are dealing with discrimination. Was that something that you kind of stumble into, or has that been a kind of a lifelong passion?
That was less stumbling into. That okay. Was knowing that I wanted to go to law school to be, helpful towards people, but knowing that I'm kind of an introvert and that I guess I did a summer way back being a social worker with foster kids and children in need of services. And it was a lot. It took a lot out of me, but I love reading and writing. So as many lawyers do, especially all those lawyers who write fiction on the side, which I've also done. But yeah, so I went to law school, and labor law, employment discrimination, administrative law, those were all the fields I was interested in. So that was more of a plan.
Sure. And again, you've mentioned it a little bit, but I could go into let's dig into this a little deeper, because there are lots and lots of folks who recognize the term bullying. And when we had Dr. Namey on, we had conversations about this with other guests as well. But I'd be interested in your perspective. People know about the term bullying. They think about, kids on the school ground and all that type of thing. So share a little bit about the connection between bullying and psychosocial hazards, at least from your perspective.
Sure. I mean, bullying is really one of the more, I think you said, severe psychosocial hazards, but it's any factor at work that can lead to work-related stress. And I think we've seen, whether it's through Gary Namey talking about Ruth's experience, his wife's horrible experience with bullying, or many people, other countries, it's a really serious psychosocial hazard. I mean, it makes people anything from anxious and getting stomach aches to thinking about taking their own life, which has happened with, unfortunately, I think it was Australia, or maybe some territory in Australia, enacted a law, Brody's Law, I think it's called, after this young woman took her life, and they enacted an anti-bullying law. So as a psychosocial hazard, it's a bad one. But just the idea that it is finally the company I worked at for a dozen years did start to bring it into occupational health and safety, which I thought was interesting because they were resistant to talk about sexual harassment, but they were working. We did a lot of audit protocols. They did bring in workplace bullying. And when you talk about law school, I'm going to just kind of digress a little bit. I had lunch with this woman I met through a friend of a friend, and she was, I think, a dean at a business school around here. And I said, do they ever teach about bullying in business school, in leadership courses? And she looked at me like I had 5 eyes. But that was probably 10 years ago. But I actually think anything, whether it's business school, which I don't know much about, or law school, these graduates and probably whatever occupational health and safety degree, they should bring it up then. You know, it's such a large part of how a workplace works or doesn't work.
Or doesn't, right? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I find it interesting that that isn't a discussion. I just find it interesting. As a matter of fact, I don't believe there's much conversation about safety in business schools in general. It's not perceived by some as an education type thing. It's considered to be a vocational thing. So if you're in a construction management or a manufacturing leadership kind of course, it'll come up. But I'm finding that as we do a better job of engineering out the physical, chemical, biological, ergonomic, safety, we're engineering that stuff out slowly but surely. But what we'll never be able to eliminate is the emotions that are associated with work. I just don't see that happening ever. I at least not in my lifetime anyway. There may be some time in the far distant future that that humans evolve past their emotions, but I don't know what that looks like. And so it's interesting that there's virtually no conversation about this in any of our, institutions of higher learning outside of, just a few. And actually, I think sometimes what we're doing is teaching people how to bully.
Yeah. I mean, look at all the leaders, look at like the leaders and look at what turns up when a company kind of comes crashing down, or just the leader. It turns out that they ruled with not right. And I guess it's Gary Namey, but anybody, it's not just one bully. It's the organization that lets them bully.
Yes. Ultimately, that really is the case, because it's about a system. Can you think of any specific incidents, whether they be personal or other people, where you talked about being a social worker, and I honestly believe that it's a good percentage of those of us who have interest around these topics do it because there was these ongoing things that keep us in the game, or there was a particular thing that happened. Do you have one of those specific incidents that drive your passion for this topic?
Well, one thing, let me throw in one more thing on the psychosocial hazards and bullying, which I should have said before, but I do have my notes that
Sure.
I made. I virtually attended the International Association of Workplace Bullying and Harassment conference a few weeks ago. And there's some awesome people from around the world that come to that. Carlos Capanecchia is somebody from Australia. And I think Carlo is his name. He said something about the discussion of workplace bullying has moved to a broader discussion of psychosocial risks. And it was really interesting because the US people were kind of back on sexual harassment and then a little bit about bullying and HR. And he's saying, bullying kind of we've moved on from just bullying to encompass it. And anyway, I wrote that down because it was impressive to me. But yes, is there any specific incident? No, I think I'm kind of an, what's it called? I don't think this is supposed to be a bad thing. I think I'm one of those highly sensitive people, and I'm a big reader, and I pick up on people's getting upset,
Sure.
take on too much, which is why the social work thing would have been really difficult. But I think that I read a ton of books growing up, and that's kind of maybe how I learned to see parts of the world. So I haven't been bullied at work. I did see somebody get bullied at one of my jobs, and it was horrible. And there was that statistic that or that study done in, I think, British Columbia with nurses, that people who witness bullying have a greater urge to quit than those who are even bullied. That was just one study, but I did see bullying and I saw how horrible it was. But I really think that wasn't it. I think I've just been on this path to make, not have things be unfair. I don't like mean people. I don't, kind of corny, but yeah. And then seeing what's going on in other parts of the world and, could be happening in the US, but isn't, it's just been like fascinating to me. I feel like it's opened up a whole door. And it seems like everybody's in their silos, the HR people and OHS and even management. And yet you start reading things like that there's a global standard on psychosocial hazards, ISO 45003, and that's all about getting top management involved. So nothing drove my passion, but something keeps, once I got there, it keeps me going.
You sound, and I have a really good friend of mine who I describe in this way. You sound like an empath to me.
Yep. Yes, I mentioned that to my daughters. One day I text them, I think I'm an empath, and they're like, "Yeah, you are."
Yeah. Honestly, I think that's important because a lot of this work, and as I shared earlier, there are a lot of folks in this work and interested in this topic, as in many ways I don't know, a way to help through our own trauma, to be quite honest. And it's good to have folks who are empathic and aren't as burdened, because the trauma can be an obstacle as well. We were talking a little bit before we came on to record, that sometimes it's difficult to get to the future and get to the solutions, because you have to kind of fight through the trauma that people have been exposed to. But again, a good point that you made about how just being around it is not good for anybody. It doesn't matter who it's directed towards, who the target is. Just being in the environment is just it's not a good thing. And I don't think organizations are at their best when there's this kind of environment and of bullying and that type of thing. So I, like I said, when I found out that you're writing the book, I had to run out and get myself a copy. And I probably one of the most interesting things we here in the U.S. I say fantasize or sometimes see ourselves, oh, this great country, we're number one in everything. And when people bring up, who's doing something better than us, they generally go to Europe. What are the Europeans doing? And they're, we should be doing like them. And share a little bit with me about psychosocial hazard management in countries like the Nordic countries and Mexico.
Okay, happy to. I don't know if it's a coincidence that a lot of the Nordic countries were among the first to pass workplace bullying laws. And a lot of times you see those surveys go by like happiest countries or like the Nordic countries. And one thing at a conference, I'm going to make a little plug for this conference just because I like it so much. It's called the Work Stress and Health Conference. It's in the US every 2 years. And it's great. The people are great. And that's where I met Gary and David Yamada. So Gary and I were at a session, and two people came in from Denmark, an employer and an employer's rep, and they were attending the conference together. And they were their thing is cooperation at work. And they were kind of perplexed that isn't a thing in other places. So, okay. The Nordic countries are one of the first, besides enacting bullying laws, to kind of use psychosocial hazards I call it an umbrella term. So it's a term that includes workplace bullying, harassment, any work factors that can lead to work-related stress. So they may have one law that says the employer has to manage anything that can lead to work-related stress. And then within that law, they list off all the many psychosocial hazards that may be included. And there are different words for it. Sweden and Denmark address the psychosocial work environment, and they have requirements for the employer to manage that. Norway, the employer has to ensure the working environment is fully satisfactory regarding employees' physical and mental welfare. Netherlands uses psychosocial workload, and I don't know if that makes sense, but it's evolving. I see how it's evolving from just bullying to taking into account anything that can cause, work-related stress or a negative workplace environment. And those are the Nordic countries, and they seem to be, I can't even say they're moving ahead. They've moved first. I think Sweden enacted a workplace bullying law in 1993.
Wow.
So,
wow.
Yeah. Now, Mexico, which I have read has a really high amount of work-related stress. So I don't know if this was what drove this, but in 2019, they enacted a really comprehensive law about psychosocial risk factors. And I don't know, we don't necessarily think of Mexico maybe as that progressive, but this is a really comprehensive law. It has different requirements depending on the size of the company, starting at 15 people. And where is it? It says psychosocial risks are described as risks that can trigger anxiety, sleep, or stress disorders. And the employer has to have a psychosocial risk prevention policy. And, it's very detailed and holds the employer accountable. And one thing I like about this law is that it mentions lack of sleep as a risk factor.
Really?
Yeah, which, in the US, a lot of times people pride themselves on, I only got 4 hours of sleep last night.
Yes.
And, a lot of, this is kind of a digression, but a lot of really serious workplace accidents like Chernobyl, and
Yes.
there's a list. Exxon Valdez have happened when people are fatigued. So that kind of plays into the whole work-life balance. And that's also, being talked about a lot these days. So that's Mexico. And can I throw in Australia?
Sure, please.
Australia is really doing a lot. They did a report a few years ago that showed a lot of deficits in their handling of harassment in general in the workplace. And, some people, I listen to that Australian Psych Health and Safety podcast, and maybe you do too. And that they've just been moving forward with enacting things on psychosocial risks. Something came into effect a few weeks ago at the start of October, and I think it's called NSW, or NW. It's
probably New South Wales.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. New South Wales just enacted something that employers have to manage psychosocial risks in the workplace. Mm-hmm. So I like to throw in Australia also, because I think they're in the forefront.
Well, I can certainly say they're in the forefront because I certainly listen to the podcast in Australia, because they're the folks who sponsor this one. So
great. Good for them.
So that shows how progressive they are in this entire space, that they have, not only are doing work there, they're doing work around the globe, through efforts like this. So that's my, friends over at People Diagnostics and Flourish DX. They're just, I find it really interesting how far ahead many of these countries are of what's going on here in the US. I really do. And I also find it interesting that so much is happening in such a short period of time, particularly after, post-pandemic. Some say it's over. Who knows whether we're at it? But I find the progress that's starting to happen, it's happening a lot faster because of, what we went through for, a couple of years of sitting at home and folks starting to recognize what's important to them. If you had either the magic wand or the podium or the opportunity to share, what should we be doing here in the US?
Oh, okay. I think I would have answered this differently a few months ago or a year or two ago. Would I my older answer is we should take a relook at the Occupational Safety and Health Act and expand it. I talked to my boss, who's been in occupational health and safety for about 40 years. And he really feels like in the US, if you don't see an injury an injury is seen as a physical injury that happens at work. And we haven't moved beyond that. And he doesn't see that that's coming as much. So my newer answer is maybe it's organization by organization. People seeing, there seems to be a lot of talk about mental health right now, which is bad and good. It's bad because I think the pandemic really messed with people's mental health. And it's good because it brings the stuff that we're seeing in other countries more to the conversation in the US. So maybe companies have to see that their employees want to be treated well, working in an environment that is safe and healthy. I also think OHS and HR have to stop being so siloed, work together for the common good of, that sounds pretty corny, but work together. Right. With the support of management, because if the top people, the tone starts at the top business, if that's not supported, nothing will happen. Going back to OSHA. Oh, I'm going to go back to OSHA because I'm excited. I went to the Total Worker Health conference sponsored by NIOSH and CDC, but I did attend virtually. At the last minute, I kind of switched. And the Surgeon General was speaking the last day. And the Surgeon General was talking about mental health at work. And he even mentioned the term workplace bullying. And I found that really encouraging. So I'm moving back to maybe the US will do something. So kind of a long answer, but maybe through the legal system, maybe through organization by organization, maybe just through the change in perception.
Right. Well, I say this a lot, and I learned it from other places, but people tend to do safety things for one of three reasons. There's the moral and ethical reason they think it's the right thing to do. There's the financial one. They look at the numbers and they see they're losing money by hurting people. And then there's the third reason they have to. And I'm okay with any one of those three. I differ with your colleague who's been around for 40 years in the occupational safety and health community. There is a generation of folks who know this needs to be
great
in the OSHA. They know it.
Thrilled.
And as a matter of fact, I can tell you that I had a personal conversation with some folks at OSHA about this, and through some of my affiliations, and there are some of us. So again, it's a quicker way to get to where we want to go, to be quite honest. So the OSHA Act, a 51-year-old act that still thinks that everybody in the workplace are men. Come on, really? Of course we need to fix it. Of course it needs to be revised. So it hasn't been looked at not really since. Yeah. And I share this with people. The 91st Congress, the 535 people who voted on the act, only 2% of them were women. I also say that only 2% of them were non-white. So
I thought you were going to say only 2% of them are still alive.
Well, I haven't checked that, a lot of them are still around, because they didn't live longer. Old white men. Yeah. But the challenge is, and I don't say that to be disparaging. I say that because there's a perspective that wasn't in the room when the act was written, which is one of the reasons why the OSHA Act does not provide for the safety of women and people of color like it should. Yeah. Because it wasn't designed to do that anyway. It also, in 19,674 words, if I'm not, last I counted, it only mentioned psychological twice. So it wasn't written to address how people feel, but it needs to be revised so it does. The Constitution wasn't written with me as a full person either. Yeah. We revised that too. So we ought to change it.
Yeah. Yeah. And just, it's interesting because the sexual harassment training I'm doing for the trucking industry, truckers are no longer just white men either. And it's time. Yeah. It's time to it's past time to take into account everybody's everybody's in the workforce. And
Yeah, I mean, and again, that's another point. I've actually been in, I consider myself not just an ally of women, but an accomplice. And the difference is those accomplices will, I've gotten myself in trouble defending my sisters sometimes because I have a mom and sisters and a wife and daughters. And I don't think just sitting around talking about, oh yeah, I support women, I won't stand up for them. I personally, I feel like I got to get involved. But so I was talking with a friend here recently who was sharing with me the epidemic of sexual assault and even rape in the trucking industry.
Oh,
and these goofy laws that will allow this to happen to women, and the employers go, well, we can't find a separate place for you all to sleep, so you both have to sleep in the truck. We don't realize you don't know each other. Really? I mean, seriously? So that's the kind of country we want to have? That's the kind of environment we want to have? I'm not sure I'm with that.
No way.
I'm not with that. I'm just not. I'm not
No.
with that. And I wouldn't want my daughter or sister to be in that kind of environment. And your point is well taken, which, obviously gets me a little fired up about it, is if we don't address psychosocial hazards in the workplace, we're never going to fix our issues around diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's not going to happen.
Exactly.
It's not going to happen.
I agree 100%. Yeah. And I just wanted to, as long as I haven't mentioned it yet, there's a book, I don't know, called Dying for a Paycheck.
Yes.
Yeah. That was really, I really like this whole human sustainability thing.
Yes.
In my third book, I definitely relied on that book. I think I'm so encouraged to hear that you've talked to people that disagree with the person who was in the industry for 40 years.
Yeah. I mean, everybody's entitled to their opinion. I just disagree. I don't, again, that same mentality or that same thought process women wouldn't have the right to vote.
Yep.
Again, I'd still be seen as property. We'd still have kids dying in factories.
Yeah.
Right. You name it, all of the progress that we've made as a society, not just here in the US, but around the world, we wouldn't have it because, it's kind of always been that way. That's the way we've done it.
Yeah, just like the bully. That's just how he is.
That's just how he is, but yeah. And like I said, I've also, again, actually kind of working through some of my own issues, to be quite honest, have gotten less judgmental of people who feel that way. I don't think that I don't think that that's a bad thing for a person to feel that way. I just disagree. I disagree. And I think we can, build a coalition of people. There are people who think that we'll never get a law to make bullying illegal in the country. And that might be true. But if we create one that says you have to address the psychosocial hazards in the environment, we'll get there anyway.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
It's about getting there, and as long as we get there, I'm fine. As long as, we get there in legal, moral, and ethical ways, as long as we get there, that's fine.
Oh, so I wrote a lot of this book. I think I wrote on the back. It's in a couple of places in my acknowledgments. During COVID, I saw that Bentley University around the corner from me in Waltham had a Hoffman Center for Business Ethics. And I applied to be a visiting researcher there because I thought nobody's visiting from Spain or something, I'll visit from around the corner because it's COVID. And it worked out really well because I see some of these issues as ethical.
Okay.
Just like you mentioned in your three choices. But
So
yeah,
good. So share more about that. I mean, you see them as ethical. I mean, how do you, share more about that?
The ethical and responsible employer should treat people, work should not hurt people. And I had to make that connection to be a visiting researcher, but they went for it. And I think that plays into this whole, what we're talking about, what should change in the US. Maybe the employer's duty of care should just expand too. So it isn't just for physical health and safety. Mm-hmm. But I think it is an ethical issue. A lot of things are ethical issues, like kids working in factories when they're, 7 years old. That's an ethical issue. I mean, what kind of a society are we that, people. So yeah, I don't know. Business ethics. I bought a book written by the person who ran the center, who's a philosopher. That's his background, is philosophy, about business ethics. And, it talks about all the stuff, the dilemmas going on at big corporations and the ethical choice, but I'm not as well versed in ethics as maybe I should be.
Well,
Just makes sense to me.
It's another important point, though. I mean, there is a lot of conversation in the business world around ESG these days, and how there are folks out there who finally decided, maybe I don't want to invest in a company who's going to destroy the environment, mistreat people, and be run like crap. Maybe I want to maybe I want to put my money into something that is a little bit more stable and has the possibility of being, effective long term. And and again, that goes to that whole second reason I was sharing before, is that there are folks who have figured out that treating people well is good business. It is. The people that you're going to run off by being mean to them are probably the good people, because the good people have options to go someplace else. The ones who don't will stay and just take the terrorism, but they're not they're not take it for long. But they're also the ones who are most likely to explode, once they finally have had enough.
Yep. And I think there's a lot of things about social media that are troubling, especially these days. But I think a great thing is people will not put up with a bad employer. They'll expose that employer, and the reputation of that employer will get harmed. And, I guess on the good side, Patagonia just got like so much great press for their environmental contribution. Like, I think he's leaving the company to the environment or something.
Well, sure.
But yeah. And also that kind of reminds me what's always said about people who are targets of bullying. It's often like the smarter, more threatening people, the good people. So yeah, but you're right with ESG. I mean, I hope, I think companies are sly, some companies, and they'll catch on to making themselves look like, good in the ESG area. But I think that the people coming up, whatever, millennials and the Gen Z people, that they're not going to put up with the same thing. And they're not going to get it. They're not going to get a 40-year career at one company. That's gone.
Right.
So,
yeah, I'm pretty convinced that. So my youngest grandchild is 4, and they won't be able to treat her like that because she's smarter than me. She is.
I believe you. I believe
she is. These 3 and 4-year-olds are smarter than me because they're coming up in this. They're digital natives. They have access to information at their fingertips. I mean, an issue my daughter has to worry about with her is that she'll pick up, she doesn't have a phone of her own, but she'll pick up her brother or sister's phone and she'll post something on Instagram if they don't watch her. And she's 4.
Wow. Yep.
So so you will not be able to, the old dude or dudette, whoever they are, who thinks they're going to mistreat a Gen Zer and think they're going to stick around. Yep. They won't do it. And
they'll call you out on it. They will call you out.
Exactly right. They'll tell all their friends who won't come and work for you. So,
exactly.
I guess you'll have to find some really expensive robots to do all that work because they're not, human beings aren't going to do it. But they also, I think, it's not just about the work. There are people who are speaking with their investment dollars and with their purchasing power as well. Because they, I've shared this with a few others. When I go to restaurants and such, often I generally ask the folks there what it's like to work there. I do. I have a son who's been in I spent some time also in the service industry. And if I get the impression that those folks aren't being treated well, I'll tell the manager in a way, you know what, I don't think we'll be coming back because you don't treat your folks well.
Awesome. That's great. That's a good idea.
It's a matter of fact, I think everybody should do it. I think.
Yeah, I like
why
that.
would you? So if you don't believe in bullying and mistreating other people, why would you buy from someone who'll do it? And it's up close and personal. I mean, it's much more difficult. As much as I'd love to call out some of these big corporations. It's much more difficult to do because
Yeah.
we have these monopolies and there's stuff that I don't really have a choice. But
Yeah.
I have a choice. I have a choice when I go into a grocery store, or to a restaurant, or to buy clothing or what have you, and I see people who look like they're just being beaten down and not being treated well. Again, I ask them. So now it may not be about work,
Mhm.
because often it is. There are other things going on, and work is the only place that they have solace.
Yeah.
But if it's about the
Yes.
work and you're not treating those folks well, I can assure you, I won't be back. I won't do it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's everybody doing small things
Yes.
helps.
Yes.
Yeah.
So again, 3 books down. So what's next? What's Ellen into next?
What am I into next? All right. Well, I guess it's good to get some book promotion happening. I mean, all right. I have to say about this book that I started thinking about this book probably before any book. I was going to call it Ills of the Modern Workplace or something. And I kind of never got around to writing it. And then I did finally get around to writing it. So, which is a long way of saying I put a lot into it. And so I guess I'll keep up with trying to promote it, because I feel like it's important. If the more the US can know what's going on in other countries, shows it can be done.
Yes.
It's happening. But what else? I'm really kind of having fun doing this, creating content for this sexual harassment course for truckers, because it's a company seems like a good company, small woman-owned company in South Carolina.
Mm.
Really good with the storyboarding and making it interesting. That's good. What else? I don't want to write another book right now, but who knows? Who knows? It comes over me. But I'm kind of encouraged to maybe get involved with, like people who are in this area in the US and are trying to move things forward. There's something called the Healthy Work Campaign. I think they're in California, kind of tie in somehow in anything I can do, projects with these groups.
Okay, you've put that out there. So watch. I mean, I recently met a group who's they're working on another. So similar to the Healthy Workplace Bill, there's a Dignity at Work Act that some folks out there are trying to get passed, and have met some of those folks and hadn't heard about the group in California. It doesn't matter to me what we call it. It just matters that it happens.
Yeah, I keep going. I've already been going back in my head to you're saying whether we get a workplace bullying bill passed or whether it's a psychosocial hazards law, it covers it regardless. That's a really, really good point. Oh, I was going to say, that WHO has just published mental health guidelines. That's another encouraging thing.
Yes.
So I guess sometimes people call psychological health and safety mental health and safety.
They do.
And I probably should have done that in the US, because people probably would have related to it more.
Right.
I don't know. It seems like stuff's going on, so I want to stay involved. I really like this field.
Yes. Yeah. As do I. And it's always good to have people with law degrees involved in stuff like this, because when you all walk in the room, sometimes that kind of helps people, make a decision.
Good point. Yeah,
it does.
It does.
It does. Yeah. I thought about going to law school, but the LSAT thing, I'm not a. God bless you.
I will tell you. Back in the day when I went to University of Connecticut and I established state residency, and I mean, my last semester was like $1,087 or something.
Oh wow!
That I don't know if it would have been worth it at the prices that
Yeah.
But I mean, look where you are. You did a dissertation. I don't know.
Well, I assume that the work is similar. It was something to do. Something to do. It's a nice credential to have, but I see a lot of things this way. I'm all about kind of the outcome. I mean, what is it that we're
Yeah.
trying to get done. And it's important to have. I believe that this book is the start of something great. I'm going to speak that into existence. I really do, because
I was going to say, put that on Amazon.
no, seriously, I really do, because as you said, people need to know that this is doable. I heard once that all things are created twice, and the first place they're created is in people's minds. And somebody had to, back in the 60s, back in I think about 1966, had to show us that you can have a little device that'll flip open and you can talk on it. And now we have phones. As a matter of fact, I have a phone that flips sideways now. But had Gene Roddenberry not, had that idea and put it into Star Trek, who knows whether we'd have that today.
Yeah.
So it has to start someplace, and people have to see. They have to see a vision of what's possible. And what you've done so eloquently in this book is show us here in the U.S. this is doable.
Yeah.
This is, and a matter of fact, I also believe that you've shown us that we could actually do it quicker because other people have done a lot of the work already.
Right. It's not reinventing the wheel. It's there. The templates are there, the checklist, the, risk management plans.
Yes.
It's just another risk.
Just another risk. And, I say this, and, I don't mean to offend, but it may offend some. If we don't catch on to mitigating and managing psychosocial risk, we'll continue to export some of the more negative things about this country.
I think you're right.
The bullying and the harassment and the power tripping and, some of the corruption. Not everybody's corrupt. I don't necessarily believe that, but we're exporting that through some of our, US based companies who think they can go to other countries and do this. And what the rest of the world is saying is like, nah, you're not going to be able to do that. And if you want to do business with us, the World Health Organization and the International Organization for Standardization and the International Labor Organization, they're all saying, look, this is a thing. And if you want to do business with us, you're going to have to do this differently. And again, if that influences what goes on here, the more the merrier, whatever it takes.
Yep. I totally agree. And I think it's great too, in this country, it's people from kind of different professions that are coming together with this, which I think makes things just stronger.
Sure.
It's not just one profession pushing forward. It's a bunch of different people. That is true. I mean, I don't get into this, but workplace violence in the US, guns in the US. Yeah, people look at us now, we're number one in that. Number one.
Right. Yeah. And there are some really positive things about this country you should be exporting. And beating people up at work physically or mentally should not be one of them.
Right.
So yes.
Somebody said, and I think it was the Total Worker Health or the International Association of Workplace Bullying and Health. I've been to both of these conferences virtually, and unfortunately, it's not as good as in person. But somebody was talking about the U.S. is a masculine country, and they're from a feminine country. I think it was a Nordic country, and it was just interesting to hear that. And
that sounds like in Hofstede's work around culture. You can have either a masculine or a feminine dominant. We've oh boy, men need some work, but I think there are even some of us that are men that don't believe we have to be that way. That being kind and taking care and having respect for other people. I think that's what real men do. So, but that's probably a conversation I should have with a bunch of dudes. So.
but that comes down to another. Okay, my last comment. I keep throwing things in. In a lot of these laws, it talks about the dignity of the worker.
Sure.
And that those words, respect and dignity, I think, the more they get thrown around and aren't made fun of, because it's easy to mock them. I think in the US, it's like, oh, come on, dignity. But it's written right into some things in other countries. I mean, everybody should be treated with dignity. How hard is that?
How hard is that? Well, Ellen, I really enjoyed our conversation, and I want to make sure that people really hear about the work that you're doing. Because again, I'm serious. I just think some of this we have to have people with a book they can sit down and read through and kind of get an understanding about what's going on. I think you've done that. And I really applaud your work. It's good to get folks who are writing good stuff to help us be better as a society. And I think you're doing that. So if people wanted to follow up with you, catch up with you, communication with you, what's the best way to do that?
I'll give out my email, lnpc2@gmail.com. But I'm a big LinkedIn fan. I really like LinkedIn. So look for Ellen Pincus Cobb on LinkedIn and reach out to me that way. I think that's probably the most doable. I don't have a website. I should have a website, but for now, LinkedIn.
That sounds great. And frankly, that's the way folks can get a hold of me as well. So on LinkedIn, I do have a website. There's a website for the podcast, psychhealthandsafetyusa.com and id2-solutions.com if folks want to reach out and have further conversations. But thanks so much, Ellen, for being here. And I do want to stay in touch regarding the work that you're doing. I I haven't shared it all here on the podcast, but there's some thoughts I have again regarding your book and the connection, the foundation it built for some other things. So we'll certainly be talking in the future about how those of us in this community who believe this is important, and particularly important here in the U.S., can continue to work together. So again, just thanks so much. It's been
thank you. I really enjoyed this convetion. I really did.
Absolutely. And for those of you again who are listening in like you do each week, you can join us next week. We've been having some very interesting guests with some really important things to say, and more recently helping me be more encouraged about what's going on here in the U.S. So again, watch us, a new episode every Friday. Wherever you get your podcast. Thanks so much. And we'll look forward to seeing you next time on the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. You've been listening to the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. To stay up to date with the best content on workplace mental health in America, subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and join the Flourish DX community at www.flourishdx.com.